In round one of the Sinquefield Cup, we have an incredibly exciting matchup for our game of the day. Carlsen against Nepo, their first classical game since the match. Can Nepo show that he has improved since then? Carlsen opens with d4, and we see them quickly go into a queen's gambit declined, where Carlsen decides to immediately capture on d5. And usually this exact move order isn't the most common because you are allowing a black's bishop to immediately get out to f5. When the pawn was still on e6, this bishop was much more shut in by this pawn. So instead of that, after you take, and after a couple more moves, Nepo is able to develop this bishop to f5, which is normally an accomplishment for black in this type of position. However, Carlsen had an idea in mind, which is that he was actually going to take advantage of the bishop's placement by first playing h3 and then g4, gaining kingside space by attacking that bishop. And after bishop e4, interestingly enough, this is actually following a previous game of Carlsen's, except where Magnus was playing black against Anand. In that game, Anand decided to put the bishop on g2, but this time Carlsen decides to play bishop e2. Now Nepo goes queen b6, attacking the pawn on b2, so Carlsen defends it. They trade the queens here, and it looks like Carlsen has just ruined his pawn structure, which is true, but at the same time, he has opened up the a file for his rook, and it's actually not very easy for black to attack these doubled isolated pawns, so they aren't that much of a weakness. Now Nepo drops back the bishop to avoid it being captured. Then Magnus says, okay, I'm going to go attack it again, and I will get that bishop, thank you very much. So he takes the bishop, then plays f3, which helps to limit the scope of black's knight on f6, while also giving him the opportunity to make his next move. So if you were white here, what would you do? In the endgame like this, you do not need to castle all the time. Instead, you often want to keep your king close to the center, which explains Magnus's next move, king to f2, keeping the king in the center where it's going to help defend some of these pawns and support them. Nepo plays knight e6, attacking the bishop so it drops back. And Nepo follows suit with king e7, again showing that the king should be in the center in the endgame. Over the next few moves, we're just going to see some slow improving moves. h4 played, a6 played, just to limit the scope of some of the rooks that are on those open files attacking those pawns. Magnus plays king g2 rather, and while we were just saying that the king wants to be in the center, this move has the specific purpose of allowing him to drop back with the bishop. Nepo plays rook d8, which prepares bishop d6, so Carlsen drops back with bishop f2 in advance. And it might look a little funny to put your bishop behind all of your pawns like this, but his idea is that if he had kept his bishop on g3, then bishop d6 would offer a trade, and Carlsen wants to keep the bishop pair advantage, so he does not want to trade those bishops off. That's why he drops back, so that after bishop d6, you can just ignore it, there's no problem. Bishop d3 gives this bishop a little more scope. After the game, Magnus suggested that Nepo should have just played this slower and played, basically not rushed anything and kind of just waited and see how Magnus would try to play. But Nepo quickly went for some counterplay. He wants to play the move c5. c5 here does not work though. What would you do? c5 can immediately be met by g5, kicking the knight away. Once the knight moves, then the d5 pawn hangs with check. So this doesn't work, which is why Nepo first plays bishop b8, uncovering the rook so it defends the d5 pawn. So how can you stop black from playing a pawn to c5? Carlsen plays knight a4. Is using the knight, so you can't go in there anymore. Now bishop d6 though comes back. Now that your knight's not pressuring a d5 anymore, c5 is in the air. So what would you do again for white? Carlsen plays a really, really strong move, bishop e1. His idea is just that he's preparing to play b4. So if Nepo does anything else other than c5, he'll never have a chance again. Because once white plays b4, then they have a complete bind over the square, and then Carlsen will continue to gradually improve his position. So Nepo instead decided to immediately play c5, but Carlsen did again call this a bit of an inaccuracy because he thought it made it actually easier for him. He trades on c5, and after a couple of trades, now the e3 pawn is under attack, so the bishop comes to defend it. Nepo has been left with this weakness on d5, and Carlsen is going to use this to his advantage, as well as other factors. So after rook h to e8, what would you do with white? Carlsen finds a really strong plan, and it's strong because of just how many things it does at once. He plays b4, kicks out the bishop, and then b5. And this does so many things. First of all, we're trading off our weak doubled pawns so that we won't have to deal with that positional liability anymore. Additionally, we're opening up our rook on a1, and we're opening our bishops. And so you can imagine that after pawn takes b5, after something like bishop takes b5, these bishops are already becoming incredibly strong, and black's king is actually feeling a bit unsafe in the middle. It's kind of being harassed by these pieces that are going to come get it. So instead of that, Nepo tries to play a5. He just gives up the pawn, but is hoping to keep some lines closed. But at this point, Carlsen is up a pawn, and he is able to convert his advantage quite convincingly. Nepo brings the king over, so does Carlsen. Then rook e7, rook comes over to d1, aiming towards this pawn and the king. Rook h8 makes an attack on h4. Carlsen finds a nice way to defend this by first playing a g5, counterattacking the knight, and then once it moves, the rook comes back to a4 to defend the pawn laterally. After knight c5, rook g4, again, just a few more slow improving moves. The bishop drops back. Bishop a2, now white has lined up all of these attackers against the d5 square. f6, okay, takes, wins the d5 pawn. So now Carlsen is up 2 pawns, not just one. After a check, knight comes back to the center to defend g6 and attack the rook. After rook f4, rook d8, b6, Nepo resigns. The idea is that if you take on b6, now white can take the pawn with check. Then white would be left up 2 pawns in a totally winning endgame. At the end of round 1, our standings are pretty clear. Carlsen's in first place as the only one who won. Everybody else has half a point, so they're all in a big tie there. And then Nepo's in last place as the only one who lost. Another typical Carlsen type of victory where he just gets a normal kind of position out of the opening, but slowly but surely positionally outplays an opponent and grinds them down. And it makes you wonder that, I mean, if Carlsen's able to put away Nepo so convincingly without allowing him really ever a chance in the game, he just kind of just fell apart, then you might wonder, I mean, if Nepo has been crushing everyone else, and I mean, he won the last candidates, loses to Carlsen in the match, wins the next candidates, now Carlsen's not going to play him anymore. So I wonder what you all think about how this kind of performance in this matchup, what it means for the dynamics of top level chess.